we're now going to look at hooking some of the table up to get ready for getting it to talk to the ROM. So you'll need the manual for this. There's something called a switch matrix, which is in every manual, nearly every manual, and it tells you what switches do what. And generally, you'll have a switch matrix, a list of locations, and you'll have a diagram about where they all live. So some of the things that are useful to do is have this obviously on you, but also in the script. Obviously, we've got a blank script. We haven't done anything yet. I've done this before. List all the switches out that are on the table that are actually used. Some aren't used. If you look down here, it says not used. Some we don't care about, which is the flipper limit switches and start buttons and other things like that. So we leave them out. We list the ones that are there. We don't have to worry about the slings, pop bumpers, or in this case, there's also another upper sling at the top. So I just mark them there to say we don't need to worry about them. But this gives us a chance to make sure we've done everything. And this is the command we'd actually end up using. So the first bit is what it's called, switch 16, SW16. And this says when it's hit, do this. When it's unhit, do this. Controller switch is how it talks to MAME. So it's saying controller switch 16 is 1, which means on, or 0, which means off. So when it's hit, it's 1. When it's unhit, it's off. Anyway, so we look around and see the diagram. So you've either got 16 is the kickback, and you see there's there. So we go over to the table, and it's as simple as we call this SW16, and that's it. You just have to make sure on physics it's enabled and at the right hit height. Also, if we're going to be doing ramps or they're going to be other places, the surface. If the surface is blank, it's playfield level. So we go through there. So that one's 26. And we can go through and do these. So in that case, so you've got 16 and 26. So we would change this to switch 26 and controller switch to 26. And once everything else is done, that basically means that that switch is hooked up and will work going forward. So they're the easy ones. You can do things like this has got a strange, I think it's like a magneto-optical switch, which is here. So one of the things you can do here is you can add a trigger, but you go around to this and you have shape none. So it literally lets you make a trigger with no physical part to it, just the trigger shape. So you just make it the size it says it is, lock it, and then rename this. If we have a look up here, this one is 57. So double check that. 57 is the crate sensor, which is correct. 57. Okay. So if we're up at the crate, we might as well carry on showing you what we're going to do with that. So the other sensors we got here is 38, which I think is 38 is the crate entrance. So what that means is LED means it's an opto, which is an optical sensor. That's actually, these aren't always entirely accurate, it's pointing roughly there. What that means is it's actually in the subway. So down here. So what we've got is where we've done before, we had this trigger here. We can copy this one. We can move it over here. And then we can make it so it fits inside the ramp. So that when a ball goes over it, one of the things that it says is it was, what was it, 58? Not 58, 38. um, create entrance. So generally what these switches are for is to know if it's made it. So if a ball's gone in the create entrance there and has actually made it all the way in, it will only go over this if it's actually made its way in. So this is the yes, you've successfully made it into the entrance. So we make this switch 38. Now this is the important bit. That's ramp 003. So the surface would be ramp 003. If you don't do that, it's on the playfield and it won't work. If you come back at another point and you rename this, it will stop working. Also, if you do what we were going to do at one point, which was turn this into a primitive to make it one piece and not have to worry about the weirdness of the ramp, that will stop working as well. In that case, if you know that it's 75 deep, this is something we can do for other things as well. You can set up what we call a height wall. So you put a wall down here, go to physics, you untick collidable, and you set the height. So in this case, minus 75, minus 75. And you can call this wall height minus 75. So h minus 75. And then what you can do is, if you get this trigger here, and you set that at, so now the surface of this trigger is whatever that surface layer is. It doesn't have to be on top of it or near it. It just has to have it as a reference. So that's minus 75. So that trigger will appear at minus 75 no matter what happens. So, and the other thing we often do is as well, we put a height wall in. We make these smaller because they're far too big. So scale it by 0.25, make it nice and small, tuck it out of the way. Copy it, make a minus 15. And if you look at these rollovers, they stick out a long way, far higher than normal rollovers stick out. So if we now select all our rollovers and make the surface minus 15, have I got them all? Yep. And then go back in. You'll see now they've lowered down to a much more reasonable level of where you would normally see them on a machine. The other ones are if we're going to use our full targets, we go and do this differently later on, but for testing purposes, we hook this all up first. So you go to the targets, obviously they're one of the main switches. So this is 64 by the looks of it. Switch 64. And it's as simple as that. So then you would go back in and you can hook those all up in this case. So we know that was 64. So go up here, say switch 64. And really it's as simple as that. You just have to go through. The reason I say to list them all out is to make sure you don't miss any, because at some point you'll have to there will be switches on the ramps that you have to figure out the position for. So this ramp up here will have a switch somewhere around here, because most ramps have what they call a ramp made switch. So you have a ramp entrance switch, which is normally down here, and a ramp made switch which is here. And the ramp made switch is where the ball would get to and won't roll back down. It will carry on going. So exactly like I said before, you'd need to make sure they're at the right height. So if you put we'll put it up here, we'll put a star because you can see it nice and easily. What we'll do so you can see it really easily is we'll color it in white. Right, so that's ramp L3, surface, ramp L3. So if we start, you see that's right up in the air. Is where it would be if we hadn't made the ramps invisible. And if we didn't, it's down on the floor. So it's very important to get your ramp surfaces right. That's how you change their height. The actual hit height is how far above the switch it activates. 50 is a standard ball, so you want to leave it at that really. You don't want to mess with it. Delete that for the time being, otherwise we'll get lost. And then, yeah, like I said, you go through the table, make sure you've got all your switches done, make sure you've done your due diligence and that everything's connected. You will get some odd ones like kickers, which we'll cover later on, but they're the same as pop bumpers and slings because they have all their own certain parts. The only other thing we've done which is slightly different on this one is this rubber here, and this is where it can sometimes confuse you, is actually a switch, which is unusual to see on modern machines. So the rubber goes across there and there's a leaf switch there. So what we have to do here is, where we would normally have this straight, I've cut a hole in it and then created another wall inside of it. And if we look at the manual, that is switch 67, left ramp 10 points. So this is switch 67. And that's just another way of building. That's a way of having a slingshot switch without being in a slingshot, because that isn't one. This one will be handled differently because this one is a slingshot, and will be handled in the script under separate code. And basically that's how you set up all of the normal switches. Most of it's documentation and making sure it's right with the manual, and not getting too confused. Okay.